and I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men. And free men you are. What will you do without freedom? Will you fight? Fight against that? No! We will run! And we will live. Die. Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
You ready? Let's go. Yeah. For those of you that want to know what we're all about, it's like this, yo. This is 10%.
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this Friday evening. Oh, the wind has been blowing out here. It sounds like a freight train going by all day long. Coming right off the lake, right down my road. So definitely, not a great day outside. So, but we can hope for better days. I'm just waiting on spring. I'm one of those people. I like to be outside. I like to be able to be with nature, either, fishing or just hiking, being out in nature, camping. Definitely outdoors person. One thing people have asked me quite a bit about, who are the players? Who are the players behind the scene? Not the president, not, your congressmen and congresswomen. And that's a difficult thing because there's a lot of people behind the scene and, directly involved or indirectly involved. But, one person that I definitely, bring up a lot is Henry Kissinger. He's done quite a bit. He said quite a bit. And I think he's one of the perfect examples. And you've seen We Are Change confront him. And, I'm gonna play, I think it's probably about 20 minutes long. It's a clip from an hour and 28 minute, documentary from Kenneth Webb, aka Change the Channel. And you can find it on YouTube. It's called Pass It Around. And you can find the full length on that Change the Channel, DA channel, on YouTube. So you could check out the full length thing, but I want to play a portion of it, talking about Henry Kissinger. So, I've done quite a bit of updating to my computer, so we should be good when it comes to playing this. And I got the stream playing in my other ear, so we'll see how this goes. But here we go.
Not for myself.
Okay, I'm not hearing anything in my other ear, so it sounded like it took off and then just died off, which is something that's been going on. Let me see what I can do. I can go ahead and pull this up on my phone, I guess, which means I won't have the stream playing in my ear. That'll be fine. Okay, give me a second here while I cue this up on my phone. Not sure how great the buffer will be on it. We'll see here. Okay, here we go. Now let's see if it'll load. Oh, that's the wrong one. That's the wrong one. Easiest way to find it, I guess, would be typing in there we go. This is the right one. And Henry Kissinger, I think it's one of the more evil, more sadistic people that has been caught in his own writings talking about this type of stuff. So, okay, here we go.
Our thoughts on our own, my mind reflex, let me know we've been
a little spoken word before the actual clip.
Want a degree of false evolution against nature's constitution, therefore I struggle to find a solution, a revolution. But I quickly grow weak as I start to peak and must conclude and plug, delete to focus on being alive, breaking from the battle I strive to focus on the things that drive me in the first place. Tranquility with the agility to recognize the facility that surrounds the feeling of life that be, like the simplistic being of a tree, the life that pulsates from inside you, inside me. So excuse me if I get pissed at their rationalizations of their manifested nations that forsakes all creations. We cannot change the station while they finish their masturbation of the word.
Throughout history, there's always been the bad guys. The ones you will see and hear about in this new show are the ones that are guilty of some of the world's worst crimes. Crimes against humanity, kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, murder, war crimes, and economic assassination, to name a few. These criminals have never been prosecuted or even brought to trial. You have seen them in the political spotlight. With no regards to human life. Unjustified. Alfred Kissinger in Germany. He studied accounting at City College in New York. In 1943, he was drafted into the United States Army. He went through basic training at Camp Croft in Spartanburg, South Carolina, was naturalized, and sent to study engineering at Lafayette College, Pennsylvania. The engineering program was later canceled, and Kissinger was reassigned to the 84th Infantry Division, where he met fellow immigrant Fritz Kramer, who arranged for him to be assigned to military intelligence. In 1944, he went to Germany in the Counterintelligence Corps. After his service, he went to Harvard, where he received his bachelor's, master's, and Ph.D. In his writings while in Harvard, he his as a royalist and reaction Nelson presidency. Administration after visiting Vietnam three. He had also become involved in the peace talks in Paris. He shared this information with Richard Nixon, running against Herbert Humphrey in the presidential election. He told him that the Johnson administration was close to an agreement with the North Vietnamese, which was being kept secret from the South until it was finalized. At the end of October, Kissinger called to tell the Nixon campaign that there had been a breakthrough in the peace talks. The bombing of North Vietnam stopped, and the final talks were to begin, which gave Humphrey a last-minute surge. A few days before the election, South Vietnam refused to join the negotiation as if we're going to
people that help anyway that I don't they're just there. The embassy the president started doing it back on the 18th, following our talk on the conversation on the 16th.
Peace talks collapsed and Nixon went on to win. Nixon wasted no time making Kissinger a national security advisor and later Secretary of State. Less than a month after Nixon took office, him and Kissinger drew up plans to bomb North Vietnam sanctuaries in neutral Cambodia, which was against the U.S. Constitution because the bombing of Cambodia was an act of war which needed approval by the U.S. Congress. Kissinger also approved a plan to conceal bombing missions from military records. Kissinger 600 secret missions over Cambodia, dropping 110,000 tons of bombs. The bombing was soon...
Okay, I know we're having audio issues. Give me a second here. Let me see if I can get a better channel here, maybe. Okay. See if this actually might help.
Picked up by the press, and Kissinger admittedly got the FBI to use wiretaps to find the leak. He wiretapped his staff as well as reporters. He began meeting secretly with the North Vietnamese negotiator Lao Duc Tho, which were kept secret from the U.S. government. Even the Secretary of Defense didn't know anything about the meetings. Meanwhile, Prince Sihanouk was soon toppled by a CIA. Kissinger denied CIA involvement in the coup. Kissinger threw support to coup leader Long Ngo, who attacked the North Vietnamese. The Nobel Peace Prize for ending the war in Vietnam. Lao Duc Tho refused the award because there was no peace in Vietnam. The war continued. The U.S. also continued to bomb Cambodia, which illegally was directed by Kissinger. A few years earlier, major corporations were worried about Salvador Allende, who was running for president of Chile, nationalizing their copper industry and conveyed their concerns to Nixon. Allende won. During the period, Allende was waiting to be confirmed by the Chilean Congress. In a meeting with Nixon, Kissinger said, responsibility of its people. In another meeting between Nixon, Kissinger, and the CIA director Helms, they wanted to come up with a plan so Allende would not come to power. In an internal CIA memo, it outlined Project Fu Belt, Track 2, the code name for secret CIA operations that were intended to undermine Salvador Allende's government and promote a military coup in Chile. This was directly under the supervision of Kissinger and kept concealed from the State Department and Defense, as well as the Embassy of Chile. Chile's General Snyder, a strong believer in their constitution, was a barrier for any type of military coup. Washington wanted him removed. The money was gathered and handled through CIA channels for weapons, tear gas, grenades, ammo, and payoffs. Kissinger later received word that Track 2 plotters had failed an attempted kidnapping of General Snyder. In a meeting with the CIA, he expressed concern if Track 2 could succeed at this time. The very next day, CIA sent a cable to Chile. It is firm and continuing policy that Allende be overthrown by a coup. It is imperative that these actions be implemented clandestinely and securely so that the United States government in American hands be well hidden. In the end, General Snyder was killed in a kidnapping attempt. The Church Committee was tasked with the investigation, in which the CIA testified that Kissinger was informed of the operation every step of the way and even demanding updates. Allende did take office, but only briefly, as a military coup ended with his killing on September 11, 1973. Augusto Pinochet took power and a reign of terror ensued that would last 17 years. Then came Watergate. Nixon resigned instead of facing impeachment. Some of the articles of impeachment were the concealment of the bombings of Cambodia and Track 2. After Nixon's resignation, which led to the impeachment being dropped, any investigation into the secret bombings in Track 2 were stopped. Kissinger remained Secretary of State under Ford. In 1975, Kissinger and Ford thought it best for Indonesia to annex East Timor. Kissinger and Ford met with the Indonesian President Suharto and gave him the go-ahead for the invasion. The American weapons being sold to Indonesia at the time were for self-defense purposes only. The U.S. provided weapons, helicopters, uniforms, ammunition, food, and logistics. Over 100,000 Timorese were killed in the invasion. Kissinger had long denied discussing the invasion in the meeting with President Suharto. Declassified documents show that during the meeting, Suharto says to President Ford, "I would like to speak to you, Mr. President, about another problem, Timor. We want your understanding if we deem it necessary to take rapid and drastic actions." Ford replies, "We will understand and will not press you on the issue. We understand the problem you have and the intentions you have." Kissinger, "You appreciate the use of U.S.-made arms could create problems. It depends on how we construe it, whether it is in self-defense or as a foreign operation. It is important that whatever you do succeeds quickly. We would be able to influence the reaction in America if whatever happens after we return." While he was on the plane headed back to the U.S. from the trip, the State Department cabled Kissinger twice, saying that the U.S. Congress would cut off military aid and weapons sales to Indonesia because clearly they were using them for offensive purposes. When Kissinger returns, he is angry. Kissinger messages the department, "I want to raise a little bit of hell about the conduct in my absence." On the Timor thing, that will leak in 3 months, and it will come out that Kissinger overruled his pristine bureaucrats and violated the law. How many people in L know about this? Arms sales continued after the short hiatus. In later meetings, one of Kissinger's aides confirms the normal relations with Indonesia had resumed. "Not willingly," said Kissinger, "illegally and beautifully." Kissinger left office when Jimmy Carter defeated Ford in the 1976 elections, but remained as an advisor for presidents to come. In 1982, Henry Kissinger founded Kissinger Associates, an international consulting firm. Although Kissinger is very secretive about his clients, some have surfaced throughout the years. One of his clients was BNL, an Italian bank whose Atlanta branch featured prominently in the BCCI and the U.S.-Iraq weapon transfer scandals of the Representative Henry Gonzalez of Texas stated the following on the floor of the House. Henry Kissinger was a paid member of the BNL Consulting Board for International Policy. Mr. Kissinger held this position during the height of the biggest banking scandal of its time, $4 billion in unreported loans to Iraq by the Atlanta branch of BNL. Mr. Kissinger resigned from BNL on February 22, 1991, just days before the Justice Department announced a 347-count indictment against BNL. Some of Kissinger Associates' prominent cronies have been Paul Bremer, former Iraq Director of Reconstruction, Nelson Cunningham, manager partner of Kissinger and McCarthy, Richard W. Fisher, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, Timothy Geithner, the United States Secretary of Treasury, Jamie Miskett, Deputy Director for Intelligence, Central Intelligence Agency, Bill Richardson, former Senior Manager Director, former U.S. diplomat J. Stapleton Roy, Vice Chairman, Senior U.S. Diplomat, Brent Scowcroft, former United States National Security Advisor. Kissinger has also belonged to the Bohemian Club, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Aspen Institute, and the Bilderberg Group. He is also an honorary Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire. In conclusion, Henry Kissinger is guilty by his own admission or by the documentation contained of crimes against humanity, war crimes, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, murder, breaching his oath of office, treason, and the list goes on and on. Henry Kissinger worked his way into political power and through his contacts built his legacy on the graves of innocent people. No one can even guess the number of dead from his political and business moves. His disregard for life and pursuit of power has earned him a seat at the table of the bad guys. Zbigniew Brzezinski was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1928. His family, members of nobility, bore the Travikota arms and hailed from Galicia. Brzezinski's father was Thaddeus Brzezinski, a Polish diplomat who was posted to Germany from 1931 to 19...
Okay, I might play a little bit more of this than I planned, but just a little bit more. But here we go.
1935. After attending prep school in Montreal, Brzezinski entered McGill University in 1945 to obtain both his bachelor's and master's degrees. His master's thesis focused on the various nationalities within the Soviet Union. Brzezinski then went on to attend Harvard University to work on his PhD, focusing on the Soviet Union and the relations between the October Revolution, Vladimir Lenin's state, and the actions of Joseph Stalin. He received his doctorate in 1953 and became a United States citizen in 1958. In 1959, he moved to New York City to teach at Columbia University, where he wrote The Soviet Bloc, Unity and Conflict. He also became a member of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York and attended meetings at the Bilderberg Group. During the 1960 U.S. presidential elections, Brzezinski was the advisor to John F. Kennedy's campaign, and in 1964, Brzezinski supported Lyndon Johnson's presidential campaign. He also supported the Vietnam War, which led to the deaths of 58,148 Americans and over 1 million Vietnamese. From 1966 to 1968, he served as a member of the Policy Planning Council of the U.S. Department of State. For the 1968 U.S. presidential campaign, Brzezinski was chairman of the Herbert Humphrey Foreign Policy Task Force. In 1969, while at Columbia University, he wrote a book called Between Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era, that was published in 1970. In his book, he predicted a more controlled and directed society would gradually appear, linked to technology. This society would be dominated by an elite group which impresses voters by allegedly superior scientific know-how. Unhindered by the restraints in traditional liberal values, this elite would not hesitate to achieve its political ends by using the latest modern techniques for influencing public behavior and keeping society under close surveillance and control. Technical and scientific momentum would then feed on the situation it exploits.
Does that not ring any bells? You know, how long ago was this written? And, you know, look what we're seeing now.
Upon reading the book, David Rockefeller lured Brzezinski away from Columbia University to become a chairman and co-founder of the Trilateral Commission in 1973. Brzezinski selected Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter as a member. Jimmy Carter announced his candidacy for the 1976 presidential campaign to a skeptical media and proclaimed himself an eager student of Brzezinski. Brzezinski became Carter's principal foreign policy advisor by the late 1975. After his victory in 1976, Carter made Brzezinski National Security Advisor. In 1977, Brzezinski forms the Nationalities Working Group, dedicated to the idea of weakening the Soviet Union by inflaming its ethnic tensions. The Islamic populations are regarded as prime targets. In December 1978, Brzezinski says, an arc of crisis stretches along the shores of the Indian Ocean, where fragile social and political structures in the region of vital importance to us threaten with fragmentation. The resulting political chaos could well be filled by elements hostile to our values and sympathetic to our adversaries. State Department official Henry Pritch will later recall that Brzezinski had the idea that Islamic forces could be used against the Soviet Union. In February 1979, after the Shah is disposed of in Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini takes over as its new leader. The U.S. is interested in continuing to work with the Iranian government. At first, the U.S. is taken aback by the new fundamentalist Islamic government, and Brzezinski contemplates fomenting a military coup. But Khomeini is fiercely anti-communist, and Brzezinski soon decides that Iran's new government can become a part of an effective anti-Soviet alliance he calls the Ark of Crisis. 9 months later, on November 4th, 1979, a group of Islamist students and militants took over the American embassy where 53 Americans were held hostage for 444 days until January 20th, 1981, in support of the Iranian Revolution. In 1980, Brzezinski planned Operation Eagle Claw, what was meant to free the hostages in Iran using the newly created Delta Force. The mission was a failure and caused the deaths of 8 American servicemen. On December 8, 1979, a little over a month after the Iranian hostage crisis began, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. The Russians were initially invited by the Afghan government to deal with the rising instability and army mutinies, and they started crossing the border on December 8. But on December 26, Russian troops stormed the presidential palace, killed the country's leader, believing that he had secret contacts with the U.S. embassy and was probably a U.S. agent. Operation Cyclone was the code name for the United States Central Intelligence Agency's program to arm, train, and finance the Afghan Mujahideen during the Soviet War in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. Operation Cyclone was one of the longest and most expensive covert CIA operations ever undertaken. Funding began with $20 to $30 million per year in 1980 and rose to $630 million per year in 1987.
Mosques back again. Because your cause is right, God is on your side.
After the 1989 Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, the United States attempted to buy back Raytheon Stinger missiles with a $55 million program to buy back around 300 missiles. The U.S. government collected most of the Stingers it had delivered, but some had found their way into Iran, Qatar, and North Korea. As for the insurgents and their leaders like Osama bin Laden, they became what we know today as Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. In a 180, in a January 1998 interview, Brzezinski admits that it was the U.S. policy to support radical Islamists to undermine Russia. He admits that the U.S. covert action drew Russia into starting the Afghan War in 1979. Asked if he has regrets about this, he responds, "Regret what? That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap, and you want me to regret it?" The day that the Soviets officially crossed the border, I wrote to President Carter, "We now have the opportunity of giving the USSR its Vietnam War." Then he is asked if he regrets having given arms and advice to the future terrorists, and he responds, "What is most important to the history of the world, the Taliban or the collapse of the Soviet Empire? Some stirred up Muslims or the liberation of Central Europe and the end of the Cold War?" In the President's Big New Brzezinski is the chairman for the RAND Corporation's Center for Middle Eastern Policy Advisory Board, counselor and trustee for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, as well as a counselor and trustee for the Center for a New American Security. He is also top advisor to Barack Obama. In conclusion, Brzezinski has used an indirect approach doctrine to commit his crimes and is guilty by his own admission or by the documentation contained of crimes against humanity, war crimes, conspiracy, breaching his oath of office, and the list goes on and on.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. Look at everything that they talked about, that they did, and the agenda that they were pushing for. All of that is coming true in the present day. All of these things are becoming reality. This is not the America that we were raised to know. That, I've seen a lot of talk on, people, they're burning the American flag. And then, I've seen it go into the alternative media liberty movement. You don't disrespect the flag. And, I've seen more people going, I really could care less about the flag or our government because this is not America. This is not the America I know. The America of today that flies the American flag is not the America I know, that I've grown up to know. Remember Obama? Fundamental transformation? He's doing it, and he's doing it at a increasing speed. And the groundwork for what he's doing now has been laid out by previous presidents. This is not something that just all of a sudden happened. And looking at history, none of it is. The whole coup over in Iran, that wasn't just overnight. That was planned out. What's happening today with the federal government has been planned out. And Kissinger and people around him, people that associate with him, that use him for advice, all these people are evil. They don't care about you or me. They don't care about their neighbor. Their fundamental goal is to seek control. It's not about creating wealth for themselves. It's not about being able to have a wonderful life. It is about seeking control over a population. The fundamental thing that goes against everybody's natural rights. And the tactics they use are sick. Because people are pawns to them. They don't care if you die. War is a racket. General Butler. Okay, I have an article here. This one from freedomoutpost.com. Business owner wins lawsuit against NSA and DHS. A small business owner and t-shirt maker who had his products forced off of internet marketplaces by National Security Agency has won his fight against the agency. Dan McCall is owner of Liberty Maniacs, which is a t-shirt company based out of Minnesota. Excuse me. We were the very first to tell you about McCall and his fight with the NSA last August when we featured him during one of our Truth and Media episodes. And I'm going to take that's coming out of Ben Swan. Yep. original post was at benswan.com. I just noticed that. I don't like how they put it. Authors. Usually when you put a article from our website, you make sure that people can tell where it's coming from. But anyways, let's go ahead. Oh, I don't know if I'll be able to do this. No, I won't. I won't play the clip, I guess. So this week, a major victory for McCall and all those who believe in rule of law. The NSA has backed off its claim that McCall's t-shirt, the NSA had infringed on their intellectual property rights. As Ben showed you, the NSA claim violated the law because what McCall had done with his t-shirt was protected speech under the guidelines of being a parody. Shortly after, the NSA began getting McCall's shirts pulled from online marketplaces like Zazzle.com. DHS, or the Department of Homeland Security, began doing the same thing, claiming that t-shirts that mocked their agency were also infringing on intellectual property. And let me see if I can get this video on my phone, because for some reason, no matter how much updating I do, it's not letting me play through my soundboard. I think I might need to take my soundboard in and get it clean. I should have this. Just give me a second. Technology, technology, technology. It's great when you have the money to afford all the nice stuff, but have a feeling they're gonna have this up kind of weird. One thing though, McCall did say, he said, when we finally filed, I was like, wow, this is real now, you know? And, yeah, he did something that a lot of people probably would have shied away from. And that's directly taking on the NSA and DHS. And I think that's because of fear. Too many people have fear that, well, if I take them on, then I'm just automatically going to lose and be harassed. And I can understand that feeling because it seems like that's usually what happens. But you can really make a difference if you're willing to challenge it. If more people stand up and go, I'm challenging this, I'm going to challenge it. No matter what, I'm challenging it. You'll make your impact. And even if you don't win, the whole fact that you're challenging it inspires other people to challenge it. Not everybody's going to go out there and do it though. And I think fear does rule a lot of people anymore. They don't feel like they're free to challenge anything. And hopefully Might be one of those things where the video is now on YouTube, which it's not looking like it is. Yeah, it doesn't look like I'll be able to play that one. But, in his case, the lawsuit was worth it. He was able to win, and, it's allowing him to, again, put these things back up for sale. Now, whether he'll have a problem, with some of the marketplaces, wanting to accept it again, we'll have to wait and see. That's another thing too, though. Sometimes even if you win, the damage is already done, and that's why we have to try to fight this stuff before that. And I had a clip here. Hopefully I bookmarked it right so I can play it quick. Now if it'll load quick, that would be nice. And this one is Stefan Molyneux, The Truth About Slavery, Past and Present. And I've, in my past research and stuff, I really got deep into looking into slavery, not only American slavery, slavery that goes well, back way before the American slavery. And it's pretty interesting how here in America we seem to only be educated about American slavery, and even at that, it's not completely the truth isn't completely told. One of the first big cases with slavery, I think, was a black man owning a white person or something. I can't remember right off bat. It's been a long time. But, there's plenty of documented, white slaves having white, slave owners, same with blacks, Asians with white. I mean, almost every culture has enslaved another culture. And a lot of times it was fruits of war. You could take your, prisoners from war and use them as slaves. That was just something that they done. Maybe you could argue that the slavery movement in America maybe went a little too long when other countries were already making it where you could own a slave. But I think that we do have a loss of history when it comes to the true history of slavery in the world. And I think a lot of it's whitewashed for political reasons. But here we go. Maybe.
Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Freedom Main Radio. I hope you're doing well. This is the truth about slavery. Now, why are we even going to talk about such an ancient and evil institution? Well, we really don't understand the history of slavery. We cannot identify its causes, and we therefore have a very tough time fighting its echoes and remnants in the here and now. And I would really like to make the case that we can put an end to human slavery once and for all, but first of all, we have to understand what it is and where it came from. So let's dive in, shall we? Thank you so much for your time. So the history of slavery. Slavery is an ancient institution common to all cultures throughout history up until the 19th century, and in many places into the 20th and 21st century. How did you become a slave? Well, you became an insolvent debtor, ran out of money. You were sold into slavery by your parents, or you were born to slave parents a lot of times, or you were captured through kidnapping by slave raiders and pirates, particularly the Barbary Coast. Slave dealing was an accepted way of life throughout all of human history, fully established in all societies, unopposed by religion, in fact, almost always supported by religion. Christians supported slavery through the Old Testament. Muslims supported slavery explicitly, and the Jews supported slavery, ran a lot of the slave trade. Now, a lot of the slaves in the world throughout history were white people or Europeans. In fact, the very word slave comes from Slav, or people of Eastern Europe. Now, the people from Eastern Europe, the reason why Slav became slave was because for thousands of years they were subjected to every conqueror who swept through the region. Celts, Greeks, Romans, barbarians, or the Conans. The ancient Greeks, who a lot of Westerners get culture, art, music, and philosophy from, were utterly dependent on slavery. Plato's Republic, one of the first blueprints for fascistic totalitarianism in the history of the world, was firmly based on slave labor. Plato himself said that owning 50 or more slaves represented the possessions of a wealthy man. Under Roman law, rebellions against your slave owners were kind of discouraged. So if your slave owner was ever found killed, all of the slaves, all of you would be put to death. There was one Roman slave owner who was found murdered, and 400 of his slaves were put to death. So a little tough to get out of the institution. 0 AD, or when Christ was born, half of the population of the Roman Empire were slaves. 3/4 of the population of Athens were slaves. Now, not really known very often, up to 1/2 or more of the arrivals in the American colonies early on were white slaves. We'll get into that a little bit later. They were slaves for life. Generally, the slavery was hereditary. Some of them were called indentured servants, so they would sign up or be kidnapped and sold into bondage. Yet these contracts were generally extended at will. Nobody was really there to enforce them. It was rare in America to own slaves. At the very peak of black slavery in America, only 6% of Southern whites owned slaves. This, of course, would be the richest 6%, and we'll get into how they used the state to maintain slavery in a few minutes. So if you include all the white people in the North, at the very height of slavery, only 1.4% of white Americans owned black slaves. Monstrous, immoral. That was the truly evil 1% of the day. Slavery was, of course, indigenous to African and Arab countries before it made its way to Europe. Slavery was widely practiced by the tribes of American Indians long before Columbus came to the New World. Ethiopia had slavery until 1942, Saudi Arabia until 1962, Peru until 68, India until 76, and Mauritania until 1980. Also coming a tad late to the anti-slavery party was the Catholic Church, because certain passages in the Old Testament sanctioned slavery. The New Testament didn't give any clear teachings to abolish it. In 1965, the Second Vatican Council declared without qualification that slavery was an infamy that dishonored the Creator and was a poison in society. To be fair, Christians, theologians mostly followed St. Augustine in arguing that slaves should be treated well, and they did discourage the owning of Christian slaves. Blacks owned slaves, even in America. According to the United States Census of 1830, in just the one town of Charleston, South Carolina, 407 black Americans owned slaves themselves. One study has concluded that 28% of free blacks owned slaves, which is far higher than the free whites who owned slaves. It was a lot of a class thing. I mean, the rich whites would own slaves. The poor whites hated slavery and hated the institution for a variety of reasons we'll get into, not least of which was the fact that it drove down the price of labor to the point where they found it almost impossible to compete. Now, what are some of the myths? Well, slavery is often portrayed as a free market phenomenon that had to be ended by governments. But the reality is there were, in fact, only two countries in the history of the world that found it necessary to end, or at least attempt to end, slavery through civil war. One was the United States of America, and the other was Haiti. Of course, the Civil War, as we'll get to in the next presentation, the truth about Abraham Lincoln, didn't really have anything to do with slavery, but had more economic motives. So slavery was a worldwide phenomenon that existed from prehistory until the 18th and 19th centuries, when Western powers, in particular England, ended it as a moral crusade. Now, why were so many Africans enslaved? Well, one of the reasons was because the African rulers within Africa, particularly in southern Middle Africa, were endlessly warring against each other, civil wars and so on. They would capture slaves, they would bring them to the seaports where the Europeans and the Arabs would pick them up. Some Arabs went inland. But you couldn't, as a white person, you couldn't go into Africa. I mean, the average life expectancy for a white person going to Africa was 11 months. You just get downed by big and small animals, lions or bugs of various kinds, cholera and so on. So they had to get caught by the black rulers, and then they would be shipped off to the ports where they'd be picked up by the Arabs and the Europeans. England, as a moral crusade led by a man we'll meet in a moment, was ended by attacking the slave ships, agitating for the removal of government support for slavery, which is really essential, and bribing slave owners to release their slaves or buying their property. Of course, you can't, under common law, retroactive law is not valid. I can't say something was illegal 5 years ago and charge you for that. So what was legitimate property had to be bought, and the British government did spend a lot of blood and treasure trying to end slavery. So, I mean, this is one of the great misconceptions of history. So, Western Europeans were very late to the party. The Muslim slave trade went on for 1,400 years. The Christian slave trade went on for a few hundred years. They were late to the party. They took very few of the slaves, as we'll see. They treated their slaves far better than what occurred in the Muslim countries, as we'll also see. So Europeans ended up fighting against slavery. Europeans ended slavery. And therefore, you only ever hear Europeans being blamed for slavery. This is horribly unjust. Look, if we want to move the moral standard of mankind further up, which I think we all want to do, let's stop attacking everyone who shows the first sign of conscience and better behavior in the world and only ascribe the blame to them. Let's not look at European guilds as a mineable resource which you can squeeze with state power to produce the diamonds of fiscal transfers. So let's look at the Eastern trade. So you know about the Atlantic slave trade, I'm sure. What is the Eastern slave trade, which was the trans-Saharan slave trade going to the Muslim countries? So the death toll from 14 centuries of the Muslim slave trade in Africa is estimated at a little over 112 million people. And remember, this is a time when the world was quite a bit less populated, which had a lot to do with the Muslim slave trade and its excellence at depopulating and disassembling human beings. Historian Robert Davies estimates North African Muslim pirates abducted and enslaved more than 1 million Europeans between 1530 and 1780. 500,000 black African slaves ended up in North America.
Yeah, I wanted to point one thing out. If you were a white European ship, there was parts of Africa that you did not want to shipwreck it. Because if you were found and you might have thought you were getting rescued, more than likely you knew you weren't. You were kind of being rescued, but not for what reason you wanted to be rescued for. If they found you and saved you, you became a slave and they would take you inland and trade you. So, you know, you didn't want to shipwreck. And these were places where they weren't allowed to trade black slaves or Muslim slaves, but they were allowed to trade white slaves. And I forget what years and stuff that was real prevalent. But that was definitely a major thing on the African coast, parts of it.
That were kidnapped by North African Muslim pirates. It's a power differential. It's not a race thing, fundamentally, slavery. Scraps of history indicate the Muslims enslaved over 150 million African people, about 50 million from other parts of the world. That's not a good, and I guess we can hold our breath awaiting for the Islamic culture to start making its apologies and for people to press Islamics for reparations. Now, one thing that's just horrifying and tragic, I mean, all of slavery is horrifying and tragic, but there are things that stick out even in this horror. Why does the Arab world not have a large black population? I mean, they took a lot of black slaves, marched them across the Sahara, and sold them in the slave auctions in the Middle Eastern world. Why? America's got a big black population. South America has a big black population as a result of slavery. Why aren't there any really in the Middle East? Well, historian Bernard Lewis provides an answer. Quote, one reason is obviously the high population of eunuchs among black males entering the Islamic lands. Another is the high death rate and low birth rate among black slaves in North Africa and the Middle East. In about 1810, Louis Frank observed in Tunisia that most black children died in infancy and that very few reached the age of manhood. A British observer in Egypt some 30 years later found conditions even worse. He said, I have it estimated that 5 or 6 years are sufficient to carry off or kill a generation of slaves, at the end of which time the whole has to be replenished. You didn't really want to be a slave going east. If you had to choose, you'd want to be going west. North African Muslim pirates raided European coastal towns and villages from all the way down in Sicily, all the way up to Cornwall, as well as European ships for about 300 years, enslaved over 1 million Europeans, including many American seamen. Some say it's 1.5 million. Christopher Hitchens points out how many know that perhaps 1.5 million Europeans and Americans were enslaved in Islamic North Africa between 1530 and 1780. What are the people of the town of Baltimore in Ireland, all carried off by corsair raiders in a single night? It doesn't fit the narrative, right? The narrative says that it's a race issue. It's a state and power issue, which I'm going to make the case for. These ghastly slave-raiding practices of the Muslim pirates had a huge effect on particularly the coastal regions of Europe. France and England and Spain lost thousands of ships, devastated their seaborne trade, retarded the growth of the economy. Long stretches of the coast in Spain and Italy were almost completely abandoned until the 19th century. The fishing industry was virtually devastated, which of course led to starvation throughout certain parts of Western Europe. Well, Christians did come, tragically, to the party. Islam dominated the slave trade from the 7th to the 15th century, but between 1519 and 1815, Europe also joined in the trade in human flesh. Interestingly enough, it was the European nations who had suffered most at the hands of the Muslim slave raiders and under centuries of Muslim military occupation, such as Spain and Portugal, who dominated the European slave trade. It was the enemies of the Reformation who brought Europe into the slave trade. The Reformation was a 16th century movement led by Martin Luther, who tried to get the Bible translated into the vernacular, into the common tongue of the people, and gave them copies of the Bible, allowed them to come to their own conclusions, shattered the unity of Christendom under the Catholic popes and the Catholic Church into Calvinists, Zwinglians, Anabaptists, Lutherans, and so on, thus provoking a century or two of vicious religious civil war, resulting in the separation of church and state for the mere survival of European civilization. So Martin Luther defied Charles V by saying, my conscience is captive to the word of God. Here I stand. I can do no other. So the Holy Roman Empire, which was in reality neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, authorized Europe's involvement in the slave trade in 1519. Britain's involvement in slavery was at first authorized in 1631 by the delightful King Charles I, who was executed by Parliament. His son Charles II reintroduced it by royal charter in 1672. Popes were very keen on slavery. One pope even rode around in a giant boat rowed by slaves. So it was not a great bulwark against religion. The destinations are surprising because generally you hear about black slavery in America. According to the Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas, 4 million slaves went to Portuguese-controlled Brazil. It's over 35% of the Atlantic slave trade. 2.5 million to the Spanish nations of South and Central America, which is 22%. Just under 18% of the British West Indies, mostly Jamaica. 14% of them went to French West Indies, and 500,000 4.4% to the Dutch West Indies, and 500,000 slaves, black slaves generally, went to North America, 4.4% of the entire slave trade. I don't see a lot of people trying to give Brazil a hard time, although Brazil ended slavery in the 1880s, much later. So here's a chart. You can just look at this to see where the enslaved Africans were sent from 1500 to 1870. It's a very small amount went to British North America. So how did this end? Well, William Wilberforce, the least ghetto name in history, on Sunday, October 28th, he wrote in his diary, "God Almighty has set before me two great objects, the suppression of the slave trade and the reformation of society." For the rest of his life, he dedicated his life as a member of Parliament to opposing the slave trade and working for the abolition of slavery throughout the British Empire. On February the 22nd, 1807, 20 years after he first began his crusade in the middle of Britain's war with France, Wilberforce and his team's labors were rewarded with victory by an overwhelming 283 votes, 4 to 16 against. The motion to abolish the slave trade was carried in the House of Commons. In 1809, the British government mobilized its navy to search suspected slave ships, even foreign vessels on the high seas. At the height of the British Empire, covered a third of the globe. The British Navy was the undisputed king of the waters. One of the tragic effects was that when a slave ship would see a British corsair coming up to it, they would generally kill the slaves and dump the bodies overboard so they wouldn't be found to be slavers. In 1810, the British Parliament declared slave trading a felony punishable by 14 years hard labor. In 1814, the British representative of the Congress of Vienna insisted on the abolition of the slave trade being included in the international treaty. The treaty was signed by all the European powers on June 9th, 1815. In 1825, Britain passed a law making slave trading punishable by death. 3 days before William Wilberforce died by an act of Parliament in 1833, the British abolished slavery itself, setting all 700,000 slaves in British overseas territories free. Wilberforce's lifetime campaign of 59 years was now fully successful. He said, shortly before he died, "Thank God that I've witnessed the day in which England is willing to give £20 million sterling for the abolition of slavery." A moral hero of mankind. Did you ever hear his name? Of course not. It does not fit the narrative and does not serve the powers that be, which we will get to. Now, one of the great tragedies of ending the Atlantic slave trade wasn't like the number of slaves captured in Africa or other places diminished. They took more of the slaves from Africa and sent them over the Sahara. Missionary explorer David Livingstone wrote graphic descriptions of the ravages of the East African slave trade. He wrote this: "2 of the women had been shot the day before for attempting to untie their thongs." That would be these arm thongs, not the butt floss bikini thongs. "One woman had her infant's brains knocked out because she could not carry her load and it. And a man was dispatched, i.e. killed, with an axe because he had broken down with fatigue. Those taken out of the country are but a very small section of the sufferers. We never realized the atrocious nature of the traffic until we saw it at the fountainhead. There, truly, Satan has his seat. Besides those actually captured, thousands are killed and die of their wounds and famine, driven from their villages by the internecine war waged for slaves, with their own clansmen and neighbors, slain by the lust of gain, which is stimulated, be it remembered always, by the slave purchases of Cuba and elsewhere. The Trans-Sahara slave trade was truly appalling. So boys from about 8 to 12, if they were captured, would be castrated. This would be penis and testicles, because Arabs had superstitions about the sexual prowess of blacks, and also castrated boys who are more docile. And
you want to talk about some sadistic slave trade? Even in America during the slave trade, stuff like that, the society would have even looked at you weird. Yeah, it's a slave, but you're going way overboard. It wasn't. Slaves actually usually had big families, and think about this. A lot of these slaves, they went across the Sahara, North Africa, and also into Asia. And all the way in, through the Middle East and into Asia, there's no big black population. But European and the Western world and their slave trade is looked at as being the evil ones. And we were the ones that freed our slaves. We didn't kill them off.
So they would castrate the boys. The survival rate was very low. So to Arab landlords, they went to the homes of wealthy Arab landlords, and they force-marched young women across endless miles of scorching sand in the Sahara Desert to become sex concubines. Most of the women died in transit. So castration, murderous castration, obviously without anesthetic or any other kind of medical procedures or protection against infection. And
most of them died. And the ones that made it were not going to reproduce. Whole, families, bloodlines, completely wiped out. Whole tribes completely wiped out. But we're the murderous ones. We're the evil ones. I'm not going to play the rest of that. There's still quite a bit there, but you can find the rest of it at Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. And the reason why I want to play that is we hear a lot more of the race car being played again. I've seen it start popping up again. And I think the reason why this is happening is there's a lot of things that I think they're getting ready to institute. And they have to try to stir up infighting amongst the people. Let's divide and conquer before we start implementing these plans. If there's nothing, if Miley Cyrus ain't out there doing something crazy, or Britney Spears or Lindsay Lohan, if we don't have any of the stars out there doing anything stupid that we can shove in the news on all mainstream media, well then, we need something to distract the people. The biggest fallback, well, just get the people fighting each other. Distract them with each other. So, I urge people to, anything that you see in the media that seems to be something that'll divide people, start looking and reading between the lines. Find out what's really going on. When Miley Cyrus or Justin Bieber or any of these, crazy people out here that, it's all about, making a fool of yourself to be recognized. Anytime you see them out there in the news, read between the lines. Start looking at documents that are going through Congress. Look at stuff that's going across the president's desk. Most everything you can usually find, on one of the websites. They post the stuff. You just really have to look for it. I have, one here that it's from Bloomberg.com, but I got it out of, wearechange.org. And, let me see if I can, I'm not going to be able to play this clip. It's only a minute clip. Give me a second here. Oop, messed up there. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. Maybe not. Come on. Maybe I'll do this. Because I think it's trying to search the wrong thing here. There we go. Now if we can get this to play. Sorry it's taken me so long. Usually I don't have this problem when I have audio playing through my soundboard. I really don't know what the hell is going on with it. I've been having problems off and on, and then this broadcast, last broadcast, and the 2 broadcasts before that, all of them completely fail. Here we go. And this is China sells enormous $48 billion worth of U.S. treasuries. They're dumping. That's what they're doing. They're dumping the U.S. dollar. And we really need to pay attention.
A surprise rise in unemployment in the UK. Britain's jobless rate rose to 7.2% in the fourth quarter. That was up from 7.1. The rate was expected to have been unchanged. It was the first increase in almost a year. It suggests, obviously, that the recent gains in the labor market have lost some of their momentum. Meanwhile, in China, it has cut its holdings of U.S. Treasury debt in December by the most in 2 years. The country reduced its position in U.S. government bonds by almost $48 billion, or 3.6% of total holdings. And this is according to data from the U.S. Treasury. The reduction came as the Federal Reserve obviously announcing plans to reduce its bond purchases. And the number of teenagers in the U.S. workforce plunging to a record low. Just 1 in 3 teens in the U.S. was either working or looking for work last month. That is the lowest level since the Labor Department began tracking the data back in 1948.
Okay, 2 good things talked about right there. You got China dumping the U.S. dollar, and you have the Fed doing what they're doing. Why does this all play out? Because the dollar in your pocket is going to be devalued. This is why prices on everything are going up. Now, when you watch all of this happen, do you think minimum wage has a better chance of getting passed? A minimum wage hike up to like $15 an hour, I think is what they're pushing for. Do you think that's more of a realistic goal for the government to be able to push through if the price on everything you buy jumps up $3 for everything? You know, milk, groceries, everything just starts skyrocketing. Seems like it wouldn't be too hard for them to convince the public to go along with it when you can't afford to buy anything. Seems like the minimum wage fight is pretty convenient with the Fed devaluing the dollar, which China recognizes and dumps its holdings. And minimum wage jobs, well, that used to be held by high school kids and fresh out of high school. Well, that's fallen because now we have adults working at McDonald's as a career, running a cashier job as a career. Jobs that used to be the high school kids or the kids right out of high school, kids in college, that would be their job. That would pay for their schooling. Now we have adults doing it. Why? Because most of our jobs have moved out of the country. And they've made it harder for someone to go out there and start a company or a job, doing jobs, for themselves. You know, if you're just a self-contracted handyman or something, you're getting written checks and all that, and you're trying to do it by the books and pay your taxes, and you get raped on taxes. So then most people want to, incorporate or do a LLC, and that just leads to more complications. But if you want to further your company or, whatever you're starting, that's basic reality that you have to face, that you have to go down these routes because they have it set up. If you don't go down those routes and you grow too big, they make it easy for them to come after you. So you have to, if you want to grow, you have to go down these routes. Otherwise, they'll just, push you off to the side. Things that these companies, these big corporations just can pay off, and they're a corporation, and liability isn't there on, the CEO and all that. It's liability of the corporation. You run into so many problems. So now we have people that have been in the workforce now working jobs that used to be for high school and college kids. And now those high school and college kids can't get a job, go through college, don't work while they go through college. Which I've spoke out about college and college graduates, and I've had more problems with college graduates. That's probably a lot of the problem, is they didn't work through college. And college anymore is such a indoctrination camp more. I think you have to have some free thought and a little bit more independent intelligence to be able to go to college and not come out brainwashed. A lot of the philosophy and psychology and sociology, all those classes, there's a lot of indoctrination in a lot of those universities and institutions. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And there's so many things that it's just unbelievable. There was a few stories I brought to you. What time is it here? 7:20. Okay. There's some stories that I brought to you this past Wednesday, about Justina Pelletier, and I have another one. Let me find it here. It might be kind of hidden by now. Trying to close out Windows, trying to get audio to play, but that didn't even help. Should have just left it open. I feel I'm getting close. Yeah, I know, I'm getting close. There it is. And this whole thing kind of centers around Boston Children's Hospital with, Justina Pelletier that, she's been taken custody by Boston Children and the social, workers and stuff in Boston, and is basically being treated for the wrong thing, and it's being witnessed by the deterioration of her health. You know, she was ice skating and now she's stuck in a wheelchair, and you know, her health is just getting bad. And again, hashtag free Justina. And you can find stories if you go search, just search the hashtag, and you'll find all the different stories surrounding this. The latest one I read came from The Blaze, and it's what we found in a Boston Children's Hospital policy manual about research on wards of the state. And I know a lot of people are sickened by the whole story of Justina Pelletier last Wednesday. The chat room was pretty active. And this right here is going to even make you sicker, because this actually kind of confirms a lot of what us conspiracy theorists talk about with the state and your child. It says here, children who are wards of the state may be included in research that presents minimal risk or greater than minimal risk if the prospect of direct benefit. Well, if it has a prospect that it might benefit them in the end, we'll go greater than minimal risk with wards of the state. Let me read this again. Children who are wards of the state may be included in research that presents minimal risk. Research, remember, research that presents minimal risk or greater than minimal risk with a prospect of direct benefit. That means that, well, since they don't have parents, we don't have to ask the parents' permission. Well, in Justina Pelletier's case, it wasn't that her parents didn't want this, procedure, that the doctor came and said, we think she's been misdiagnosed, we think it's a neurological thing. Meaning, what they were actually saying is, we think it's just all in her head. And when they found out about it, they weren't too happy and they wanted to take their daughter. Well, nope, we're going to call her a ward of the state. We get custody and we can continue our research. That's a line from Boston Children's Hospital's Clinical Investigations Policy and Procedure Manual. It's the same facility that took over the care of 15-year-old Justina Pelletier against her parents' wishes last year, and they continue to wonder why. The parents of the teen from West Hartford, Connecticut, at the center of a custody patients' right and medical diagnosis battle, have questioned the motives as to why Boston Children's Hospital countered the medical diagnosis and recommended treatment set by a Tufts Medical Center physician years earlier. Justina was taken as a ward of the state by the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families on February 14, 2013. Again, this has been over a year now. And remains in the Child Service Department custody still. The hospital's clinical investigations policy continues. Emphasis added. Children who are wards of the state may be included in research that presents greater than minimal risk with no prospect of direct benefit. 46.406, I meant 46.406, 50.53, or 46.407, 50.54. Only in the Institutional Review Board determines and documents that such research is related to their status as wards or conducted in schools, camps, hospitals, institutions. Remember, schools, camps, hospitals, institutions, or smaller settings in which the majority of the children involved as participants are not wards. So basically the school and camps can take, if your custody of your child's taken away from you by the ward, and they can use the camps, the schools, the hospitals, institutions, or similar settings in which the majority of children involved as participants are not wards. So they can basically, any wards can be put into some type of research. This is sick. In such cases, the patient is presented by at least one advocate appointed by the Institutional Review Board, who will act on their behalf and in the patient's best interest. At any time research would involve a ward of the state, the document says a proposal must be presented in detail to the Institutional Review Board and be approved by DCF's Research Proposal Review Committee. Boston Children's Hospital declined to comment about the case and the policy to the blaze. Dr. Richard Bowles, a pediatrician in the Los Angeles area and the medical director of Corrigan Life Sciences, a biotechnology and DNA sequencing company specializing in metabolic disorders, told the Blaze it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for Boston Children's Hospital to conduct medical research. They are a research facility, he said. Boyles told the Blaze that any research involves ethics committees and is up front. He said the system is so procedural now that if he wanted to survey his own patients for something as simple as asking where they bought their vitamins so he could advise his other patients accordingly, he would have to go through a whole protocol and a wealth of paperwork. Why do you think they have to do that when the state's involved? I'm not going to read the rest of this. It's kind of long, but you can find it at the Blaze. The title of that article is What We Found in a Boston Children's Hospital Policy Manual About Research on Wards of the State. And that was posted on the 20th. Sick. They basically can take your kids, once they're wards of the state, they're guinea pigs. That's basically what that comes down to. Take the children, become wards of the state, and they're guinea pigs. And we see this in the educational system, the public schools. We see this with, Common Core. Common Core here in Indiana, it's been on like pause per se. And, they wanted to review it and, see if they wanted to institute it or not. And, the problem with that I think it was up to first or second grade, books that were made for Common Core standards were already put into those classrooms. And at least, I know, in Allen County, I think Fort Wayne Community Schools did it. And then there's a few other schools all around Indiana, community schools, city community schools that have bought some books for, some of the lower grades and have instituted this. So the books are already there, even though the school's not going by Common Core standards. And the standards are bad enough, but what you're finding in the educational material that they're putting out to go along with the standards, because they always say, well, it's only standards. It's not, the actual, changing, how do they word that? It's not a curriculum, is how they say it. It's not a curriculum. It's just standards. But when the curriculum is based off of the standards that are so idiotic, it becomes the curriculum. It is a curriculum. And, I had probably 5 different, programs streaming between, last broadcast, this one, different, I even had Alex Jones at one time playing in one screen. I had, Glenn Beck. I had some MSNBC. Oh my gosh. It was just nuts. I was just watching videos left and right, just going nuts, trying to soak up a lot of stuff I wanted to catch up on because I've been pretty busy. But, I every time I see something Common Core pop up on any of the, videos or any, programs I'm watching, I automatically, my attention is drawn to it because of what's going through on in Indiana. But I seen Glenn Beck start going off on Common Core, and I unmuted it, and, he brought up a math problem that is in a Common Core curriculum. 15 minus 8. And I forgot to hit any type of record on it, so I didn't, get it to go back over it. But, I forget how they worded the question, but, how can you, take 8 from 15 using 10? And what they wanted the kids to do is, first off, how would you write 15 minus 10 and do it, the math? You put 15 and then 8 below 15, and you put your negative symbol, and you would go, well, 15 minus 8 would be 7. Oh, okay. That's easy. So, they want them to do it, 15 minus 10 would be 5. So you add 2 to 8 to round it up to 10. And then you minus that 10 from 15, you get 5. Well, since you had to round up to 10, that was 2 above 8, you have to now add 2 to that 5 that came from the 15 minus 10, and that gives you 7. What? Are you serious? That's how they want you to do it. 15, to get 15 minus 8 equals 7, they want you to do 15 minus 10 equals 5. And since you had to round up from 8 to 10, that was 2. So 5 plus 2 equals 7. Oh my gosh. I would send that work right back to the school with the kid and say, you either give my child real math questions and stop with this BS, or I'm pulling my kid out of the school. Cause that's ridiculous. They are going to have kids that are going to come out of school taking 20 minutes to count your change because 15 minus 8 equals 7 is not how you do it. You have to go, well, 8 round up to 10, 15 minus 10 equals 5. I had to round up from 8 to 10, that was 2. So 5 plus 2 equals 7. Okay, now I know how much I owe you. Really? There's been a lot of stuff that I've uncovered. And here in Indiana, like I said, they've had Common Core on review and paused, not to be instituted as standards. Well, there's some news. Well, they've went over and changed a whole bunch of stuff. But they did it in a way that you can still go ahead and, we want the schools to be able to go ahead and start ordering their Common Core, curriculum. Because it's Common Core curriculum. It's curriculum based on Common Core. Now they're basically admitting it. You can buy your Common Core textbooks. So you're saying they can buy their Common Core curriculum. So basically here in Indiana, they're pushing Common Core standards under a guise. Good job, Indiana. They're pulling the wool over your eyes. It is just amazing how these criminals can get away with this stuff. Just amazing. Okay, give me a second here. I hate having to do this on my phone. I had something here from Pigmine 5. I have it. Actually, I still have that on my screen, but I can't bring it up. It won't play through my board. And I'm not sure what's going on here now. Oh, now I do. Sorry it's taking me so long here, guys. Hate doing that to you guys. And here we go.
U.S. President Barack Obama will sit down with the Dalai Lama at the White House, and China is not happy about it. Beijing says that President Obama's meeting with the exiled Tibetan spiritual leader will, quote, severely impair China-U.S. relations.
Chinese government's position on Tibetan issues has been clear-cut and consistent. And I also want to point out that we're opposed to any foreign leaders meeting with the Dalai Lama. I want to stress that if any country insists on impairing China's interests, will eventually hurt its own interests. We urge the U.S. immediately cancel the meeting in order to prevent further damage to China-U.S. relations.
And with more on today's meeting and the potential fallout, CNN senior White House correspondent Jim Acosta joins me now from Washington. And Jim, Beijing is very upset about this upcoming meeting. They say it will hurt relations. Does the White House think that is a real risk here?
Well, Christy, I think that those comments are duly noted by this White House, but a spokesman for the National Security Council here at the White House said last night in a statement that, look, presidents from both parties have met with the Dalai Lama. This is a fairly standard visit from the Tibetan spiritual leader. We do expect him here in about 2 hours from now. And one thing that the White House has said is that they have taken notice of what they call a deteriorating human rights situation in the Tibetan region. And let me show you a statement that NSC spokeswoman Caitlin Hayden put out to reporters last night. It says that the United States supports the Dalai Lama's middle way approach of neither assimilation nor independence for Tibetans in China. The United States recognizes Tibet to be a part of the People's Republic of China, and we do not support Tibetan independence. The United States strongly supports human rights and religious freedom in China. And so one thing that we are going to be watching here at the White House, Christy, is this visit between the president and the Dalai Lama, whether or not, press will be allowed in. At this point, cameras are not going to be allowed into that meeting, so we're going to be only getting a readout at this point.
Well, China is a little, there we go. China's a little upset, but, I really don't even see the point in all of this anymore. We have this, let's get the picture of the Dalai Lama and Obama together. Let's say they had a meeting, and really all it is basically, come over and have some drinks with me and we'll eat some food on the taxpayer's tab. Hey, you want to come over? Hey, call so-and-so from that country. Have him come over tonight. We'll drink some beer and eat some food and lick our silver spoons, all on the taxpayer's tab. So, it's almost like we've just gotten so numb to it. I don't know about you, but I hear stuff like this. It's like, well, how is this even news? Why do we even care anymore? Well, all of the administrations in the past have been meeting with exactly. Who cares? What does this do? Who does this help? Why? Why do we care? It seems to be the same thing all the time. We'll have presidents meet with people, and right after they leave, we're still fighting. Because it's just BS. It's all politically motivated, and it's sickening. It's a way for people to try to push agendas, or you want to kind of get at China. Well, invite the Dalai Lama, or we'll really get their attention and we'll irritate them a little bit. Maybe they'll back off. It's just crazy. Okay, I had a pretty good one here. if I can get this ad on my way. There we go. This was actually 6 hours ago. Breaking: Missouri legislators vote to nullify all gun control laws. Jefferson City, Missouri, February 21st. A Missouri bill which seeks to nullify virtually every federal gun control measure on the books, whether past, present, or future, passed the Senate Thursday. SB 613 would ban the state from enforcing virtually all federal gun control measures and includes criminal charges for federal agents attempting to violate the right to keep and bear arms in Missouri. The measure passed 23-10. Wow. And again, it passed the Senate. SB 613 counts as what would be the strongest defense against federal encroachments on the right to keep and bear arms ever considered at the state level. It reads in part, all federal acts, laws, executive orders, administrative orders, court orders, rules, and regulations, whether past, present, or future, which infringe on the people's right to keep and bear arms as guaranteed by the Second Amendment to the United States and Section 23 of the Missouri Constitution shall be invalid in this state, shall not be recognized by the state, shall be specifically rejected by the state, and shall be considered null and void and of no effect in this state. Federal acts which would be considered null and void and of no effect include, but are not limited to, any tax, levy, fee, or stamp imposed on firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition not common to all other goods and services which might reasonably be expected to create a chilling effect on the purchase or ownership of these items by law-abiding citizens. Basically, no petty ammo tax on that would make ammo so expensive you can't afford it. Any registering or tracking of firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition which might reasonably be expected to create a chilling effect on the purchase or ownership of those items by law-abiding citizens. Any registering or tracking of the owners of firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition which might be reasonably expected to create a chilling effect on the purchase or ownership of those items by law-abiding citizens. D. Any act forbidding the possession, ownership, or use or transfer of a firearm, firearm accessory, or ammunition by law-abiding citizens. And last but not least, any act ordering the confiscation of firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition from law-abiding citizens. Wow. The legislation specifically bans all state employees from enforcing or attempting to enforce any acts running counter to the proposed law. Such a tactic is an extremely effective way to stop federal government busting at the seams. Even the National Governors Association admitted the same recently when it sent out a press release noting that states are partners with the federal government in implementing most federal programs. That means states can create impediments to enforcing and implementing most federal programs. On federal gun control measures, Judge Andrew Napolitano suggested that a single state standing down would make federal gun laws nearly impossible to enforce within that state. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, advised this very tactic. Madison supplied the blueprint for resisting federal power in Federalist 46. He outlined several steps that states can take to effective stop an unwarranted measure, or even a warrantable measure of the federal government. Madison called for the refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union as a way to successfully thwart federal acts. SB 613 now moves to the State House, where it will first need to pass out of committee before the full House can consider it. Hopefully that passes. I think that would send chills to the federal government. They would, oh my gosh, we're losing. And, that would be great. They really need to lose. And 10th Amendment Center has great, stuff you can download to give to your representatives to try to pass bills like that. So, and it's really a fill in the blank type thing where you print it off. The blanks get filled in with your state, your, locality, your representative's name, his signature, and he can just fill in the blanks and put it in. And try to get past through committee and state and house and, get it through all that. Senate and House, and you really can make more of an effect at your local level, because federal laws can't be enforced if the states don't and can't act with the federal government to implement that stuff. I'm kind of surprised to see that going on in Missouri. I figured there would be other states that would push as extreme as that. That haven't. But again, 10th Amendment Center, if you want to find something to do that. Hopefully I can get this one to pull up here quick. I thought this was kind of interesting. I seen it, yesterday. Or was it yesterday? Yeah, it was sometime. I was up till like 5 o'clock this morning, so. Venture capitalists plan to divide California into 6 separate states moves forward. Yeah, you heard it. California's Secretary of State Deborah Brown gave 55-year-old tech inventor Tim Draper permission to start collecting petition signatures to split California into 6 separate states. Draper claims that California should be divided up because economic and social culture varies greatly from one area of the state to another. He asserts that this makes California as it is now nearly ungovernable because the needs in each section of the state differ. With 6 Californias, people will be closer to their state governments, and states can get a refresh, he said. For the plan to get on a ballot, Draper needs 807,615 signatures from registered voters on his petition by July 18th. He plans to launch a large-scale grassroots effort to get the signatures that he needs. Under his plan, South Carolina would, I think that was, wrong. South California would be, consist of San Diego and Orange County. West California would consist of Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. Central California would consist of Bakersville, Fresno, and Stockton, Silicon Valley. Would consist of San Francisco and San Jose. North California would consist of Sacramento, metropolitan area, and Jefferson. Would consist of the Redding and Eureka areas. In the past decade, California has dealt with financial hardships largely as a result of overspending. If divided into 6 separate states, the total debt would be divided between each state based on population. Secretary of State Deborah Brown said on Tuesday, all tax collections and spending by the existing state of California would end and its assets and liabilities divided among the new states. Critics claim that the plan is full of flaws and is unlikely to materialize. Dartmouth College professor of government Brandon Nyland said, splitting California into 6 states would raise all sorts of concerns about the partisan balance of the state. No, because it wouldn't be a state no more. I can't imagine this would ever go anywhere. So what they're basically saying is, well, if we divide it into 6 states, we won't have a power grab. That's what they're saying. Because they know if California was divided, there's a lot of parts of California that would definitely go a different way. Because California is so big and it's all voting for one, they're able to use large portions of California that lean one direction in their favor. While whole sections of California are basically, under a regime that pushes something that they completely disagree with. Not saying that, places like Los Angeles don't have their conservatives and all that, and Hollywood, but it's ruled by liberals. There's a lot of places that would probably go conservative in California. Libertarian, they would go Green Party, definitely third parties I think would sprout up in California if they split into 6 states. Says here, still Draper insists that his plan would benefit all residents in the current Golden State. A more localized government will allow citizens to have more of a voice in their state and communities, he asserted. Which it would. It would. You best believe it would. Isn't that what we try to do when we try to get our states to take control of the state instead of the federal government? Get the federal government out of it. Eventually get the state out of it and keep localizing until we have individual freedom again. A more localized government will allow citizens to have more of a voice in their state and community, he asserted. We're simply too big and bloated, he said. The sheer size of California raises questions about representation and accountability. It sure does. Well, that's all for tonight. I hear the bumper coming in. Want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Tune in for all the great broadcasts here on UCY. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Take care.